Partner called me worthless for staying home with the kids. Said you don't contribute. I wrote a novel during nap times, sold it for $2 million, then served divorce papers. My name is Faye. 36, mother of 2 toddlers, and, until recently, married to Pierce, who, in his words, was a rising star in the tech world. I'll give him this, he knew how to paint a pretty picture when we first met. He was all sharp suits, quick wit, and sparkling ambition. I was fresh out of college, still dreaming of being a novelist, and he was, well, Pierce. The kind of guy who knew everyone and could make you believe in anything, even his hollow promises. But this story isn't about the golden days. Those are long gone. About a year after we had our first child, I made the choice to stay home, something Pierce was more than eager to suggest. It'll be good for the kids, right? He said, flashing that charming smile that used to make me melt. I'll take care of everything. Just focus on the baby. You don't need to stress about work. For a while, it felt right. I thought he was giving me the gift of freedom to be with our child, to watch every milestone, to make our home into something warm and welcoming. But slowly, I realized that freedom came with an invisible price tag. One that he would start collecting on as soon as the honeymoon phase wore off. It started with little remarks. Passive-aggressive digs slipped in so smoothly that I sometimes questioned if I was imagining things. One night, I just finished getting the kids to bed after a long day of wrangling diapers and spilled Cheerios when Pierce came home, already frustrated from work. He looked around the house, taking in the laundry that hadn't been folded yet, a plate of half-eaten baby food on the counter, and the toys scattered across the living room floor. What, he muttered, setting his briefcase down with a loud thud. What exactly have you been doing all day, Faye? I looked up, feeling my patience start to crack. Keeping 2 tiny humans alive, Pierce. Ever tried that? Oh, come on, he scoffed, running a hand through his hair. I mean, how hard can it be? I bit my tongue, too tired to start another argument. Instead, I just nodded, forced a small smile, and went to finish tidying up the toys. But in that moment, a little part of me snapped. How hard can it be? I thought bitterly. And yet he'd never bothered to find out. As time went on, Pierce became more and more convinced that I was wasting my potential by staying home with the kids. He'd make remarks over breakfast, mutter things as he left for work, leaving a trail of small insults behind him like crumbs. And every single time, I swallowed my anger and just let it slide, telling myself he'd had a bad day or that he was just stressed from work. But the truth was, those little comments were piling up, wearing me down. One night, I was in the middle of bathing the kids, bubbles everywhere and squeals bouncing off the walls, when I heard the front door open. Pierce walked in, looked over, and rolled his eyes. Is it really this chaotic every night? He asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. It's bath time, Pierce, I said, trying to keep my tone light. What do you expect? He just shook his head, muttering under his breath as he walked away. I don't know how you do this every day. The words sounded almost sympathetic, but there was something in his voice, a hint of disdain, that made my stomach churn. I knew he didn't actually mean it. Later that night, after the kids were finally asleep, I found him sitting in the living room, scrolling through his phone. I sat down across from him, feeling that familiar knot of frustration in my chest. Do you really think I don't do anything? I asked, my voice softer than I intended. He didn't even look up from his phone. Look, Faye, I know you're busy with the kids. I get it, but you don't contribute financially. I mean, I'm the one paying the bills, keeping this whole thing afloat. I stared at him, feeling the sting of his words settle deep inside. So, what? You think that makes you better than me? Oh, don't be dramatic, he said, finally looking up. I'm just saying, maybe you could be doing something more productive. Something that actually helps us. Something that actually helps us. The words echoed in my mind long after he'd gone to bed. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that he saw me as a burden. A waste of potential. His words were like poison, seeping into every corner of my mind, twisting everything I'd once believed about myself. A week later, I was on the phone with my sister, Leanna. She'd always been the voice of reason, the person who never sugarcoated anything. When she picked up, I barely got a word in before she launched into a story about a rude client she'd had to deal with at her real estate office. I listened, nodding and smiling, but when I tried to tell her about Pierce's latest comment, my voice cracked. What did he say? She asked, her tone instantly serious. He said I don't contribute, I whispered, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. That I don't do anything. Silence filled the line. Then, Leanna's voice came through, sharp and steady. Faye, you know that's garbage, right? I let out a shaky laugh. Maybe. But maybe he's right. I mean, what do I really do? You're raising his kids, Faye, she snapped. Does he have any idea what that's like? I bet he couldn't last one day doing what you do. I could feel tears prickling at the corners of my eyes, but I forced myself to hold them back. He thinks I'm wasting my life. You're not wasting anything, Leanna said firmly. And if he can't see that, then maybe you need to show him. That conversation with Leanna lit a spark in me. I wasn't sure what I'd do, but I knew one thing: I needed to reclaim something for myself. And that night, after Pierce went to bed, I dug out my old laptop, the one I hadn't touched in years. I sat at the kitchen table, fingers hovering over the keys, feeling a mixture of excitement and fear. I hadn't written anything in so long. What if I'd lost it? What if I was terrible? But the words came, slowly at first, then faster, tumbling out of me like they'd been trapped inside, just waiting for a way out. I wrote about a woman who'd lost herself in the demands of her family, who'd given everything and gotten nothing in return. I wrote about her struggles, her doubts, her dreams. And as I wrote, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders, a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. For the next 6 months, I kept writing. Every night, after the kids were in bed, I'd sit down at that kitchen table and pour my heart onto the page. And I kept it a secret from Pierce. I didn't want him to know, didn't want him to have the chance to belittle me again, to make me doubt myself. Then one night, I was finishing a chapter when I heard Pierce's voice behind me. "What are you doing?" he asked, his tone cold and suspicious. I jumped, slamming the laptop shut. "Nothing. Just writing." "Writing?" he scoffed. "For what? You think you're going to make a living off that?" My cheeks flushed, but I held my ground. "Maybe. You don't know." He laughed, shaking his head. "Oh, Faye, you're wasting your time. You'll never make anything out of this. It's just a hobby." His words stung, but I didn't let him see it. I just nodded, pretending to agree, and waited for him to go to bed. But as soon as he was gone, I opened my laptop again, determined to prove him wrong. And then, one day, I got an email from a literary agent. She loved my work, thought it had potential. I could barely believe it. I read the email over and over, my hands shaking with excitement. I'd done it, I'd finally done something for myself. But I kept it a secret, even as the agent found a publisher, even as they started talking about a book deal. I didn't tell Pierce. I wanted to wait, wanted to see his face when I could finally tell him that I'd accomplished something without his help, without his approval. And then, the contract came in. A $2 million advance. I could barely breathe as I signed the papers, knowing that this was the start of something new, something big. And that night, as I lay in bed beside Pierce, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. The night I signed that contract, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to tell Pierce I'd succeeded. No, I was going to make sure he felt every bit of condescension, every dismissal, every insult he'd ever thrown my way. I wanted him to realize, in the most undeniable way possible, just how deeply he had underestimated me. And for the first time in years, I felt powerful. The next morning, I called my sister, Leanna. Her voice was all business as she picked up, as if she was already in the middle of 3 things at once. "Leanna," I said, my voice almost shaking with excitement. "I did it." She was silent for a moment, then let out a long, slow laugh. "You did what?" "They accepted the manuscript. I got a $2 million advance." She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. $2 million? Faye, are you kidding me? You did it. I knew you could. "I want him to know," I said. "I want him to feel every bit of what he's put me through. I'm not just going to tell him. I'm going to show him." Leanna was quiet for a moment, then said, "Tell me how I can help." I spent the next few weeks preparing in secret. I hired an attorney, drew up divorce papers, and started looking for a new place for myself and the kids. I made sure everything was airtight. Pierce wasn't going to weasel his way out of this one. I'd given up years of my life, my dreams, and my freedom for this man, and now it was time to take it all back. Then came the day. Pierce was out at one of his typical networking dinners, which was code for a 3-hour drinking session with his equally smug colleagues. I waited until he got home, just as he was loosening his tie and muttering about people who don't understand the stress of real work. He didn't even notice I was standing there until I cleared my throat. "Oh, hey, you're up," he said, barely looking at me. "Pierce, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My heart was pounding, but I refused to let him see any weakness. He let out an exasperated sigh, as if I was already wasting his precious time. "What is it now, Faye? Another lecture about how hard it is to stay home with the kids?" I almost laughed. He was going to regret every word he'd ever spoken to me. "No, actually. I just wanted to tell you I've been writing a book." He raised an eyebrow, smirking. "A book? Let me guess, some self-help thing about finding yourself in motherhood or something?" I shook my head, smiling despite myself. "No, it's a novel. I wrote it during nap times, after the kids went to bed. You didn't notice because you never cared enough to ask what I was doing." He rolled his eyes. "So, What? You wrote a book. Good for you, Faye. You know, that's cute, but maybe if you focus that energy on finding a real job, we wouldn't be stretched so thin. Oh, we're not stretched thin, I said, unable to hide the grin spreading across my face. In fact, I just signed a publishing contract. They're giving me a $2 million advance. His face fell, his usual smugness melting away in an instant. What? 2 million? Yes, Pierce. $2 million, I said, savoring every word. It turns out that hobby of mine was actually a whole lot more productive than you ever gave me credit for. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. You always told me I didn't contribute, that I was just sitting around, not doing anything worthwhile. Well, now I have the means to support myself and the kids. I don't need you. And I certainly don't need your condescension. I reached into my bag and pulled out the divorce papers, placing them on the coffee table between us. I think it's time we go our separate ways. You can keep your high-stress, high-powered life, and I'll take my freedom back. He stared at the papers, his face a mixture of shock, confusion, and anger. You're divorcing me? After everything I've done for you? I let out a laugh, a bitter sound that felt like years of pent-up frustration finally being set free. Everything you've done for me? Pierce, you've done nothing but tear me down, belittle me, and make me feel like I'm nothing. You wanted me to believe I was worthless without you. But I'm not. And I never was. He shook his head, still not fully processing it. This is insane, Faye. You can't just walk out because you got a little book deal. Be realistic. You wouldn't even have this deal if it weren't for me taking care of the finances, supporting you so you could stay home. Supporting me? I almost laughed again. I supported myself. I stayed in this house, put up with your insults, and sacrificed my dreams for years. But now, that's over. I'm leaving, and I'm taking the kids with me. His face went pale. Wait. The kids? You can't just take the kids, Faye. Oh, I can, I said, voice firm. I have every email, every note from our therapy sessions, every piece of proof of how you treated me like a maid instead of a wife. I have enough evidence to make sure you'll be lucky to see the kids on weekends. He tried to argue, his voice rising, but I didn't listen. I'd waited too long to have this moment taken away from me. I picked up my bag, ready to walk out of the house and into my new life, but I turned back one last time. You wanted me to believe I was worthless, Pierce, I said, my voice steady. But I just signed a $2 million contract without you. Turns out, the only worthless thing in my life was you. With that, I walked out of the house, feeling lighter than I had in years. I moved into the new place Leanna had helped me find, filed the divorce papers, and set up my kids' rooms. Pierce fought me, of course. He tried every tactic in the book, begging, guilt-tripping, even trying to publicly humiliate me. But I had the upper hand. I had built a case against him, a clear record of his condescending treatment, his dismissive words, his lack of involvement with the kids. And in the end, the court sided with me. Pierce got visitation rights, but I got primary custody. And every time I looked around my new home, my own space, filled with my own things, I felt a sense of freedom that I hadn't known since I first met him. The day my book hit the bestseller list, I celebrated with Leanna and the kids, feeling a mixture of pride and relief. I'd done it. I'd rebuilt my life, my dreams, and my confidence without Pierce. People ask me if revenge is sweet, and I always smile. For me, it was more than that. It was liberating. It was the realization that no matter how much someone tries to tear you down, to make you feel like you're nothing, you always have the power to rise above. And when I did, I didn't just get revenge, I reclaimed my life. And that, I think, is the best revenge of all.